Well, here's the reality about the state of education in America. American students are still reeling from learning losses during the pandemic. Students are now, on average, a quarter year behind and would need an additional 4 months of reading and math just to catch up. This is the dumbing down of kids continues, with schools turning to 4-day school weeks, no grades, and curriculum focused on woke ideology.
But that's not the only problem. Teachers have been leaving the profession in droves. There are currently tens of thousands of vacancies, as 160,000 jobs are filled by underqualified teachers. So how do we fix this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. We've got a very special guest with us today. Please welcome former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Secretary, thank you so much for being here. Really important day for us, really important topic for this town hall as well. We want to get your take on a lot of different issues, but as the former Education Secretary, we just want to start with something pretty basic, which is where we stand right now. What's the #1 issue when it comes to education in America?
Well, the #1 issue is that far too many kids in this country have fallen way behind. This is not new because of the pandemic. It was exacerbated by the pandemic. But the reality is millions of kids are not being prepared for a productive future. And that is the big issue. But the solution, in my view, is education freedom and giving parents and students the power to find the right place and the right learning environment for them.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly looking for solutions. And you saw when you walked in, we've got a great studio audience here. I want to ask them what they're most concerned about. So let me ask you some questions about what you think the biggest problems in education in America are. Let's start with this one. How many of you would say learning loss among our students is the biggest problem in education right now? Okay, we got a few hands for that one. Let me go to this one. How many would say the lack of school choice is the biggest? I heard some noise there as well. Okay, so it's audible here. Last one. What about woke curriculum? We hear a lot about woke curriculum. Is that the biggest problem in education? All right, now let me end with this one. How many would say, I can't even choose between the three because I'm concerned about all of them? Okay, so we've got a lot of agreement on what the problems are. We talk about the problems, but we want to think about how to get over them. When you think about kind of step one in that process, the biggest thing we need to chip away at first, Secretary, what would you say?
Well, the biggest thing is to really break down the power of the system that has held millions of kids hostage to a system rather than their best education. And that has been a government-controlled, government-run system, largely controlled at the top by the school unions. I refer to them as school unions, not teachers' unions, because they don't really represent teachers. They represent themselves and their interests at the expense of kids and expense of what kids really need.
How do we go about starting to push back on that? I mean, the teachers' unions have been around for decades, the school unions, as you say. I mean, how do you start to go about changing that power dynamic?
Well, we're seeing it change now as parents awakened during the pandemic to what was really going on in their children's schools and their children's lives. And it's great to see the momentum that has built behind education freedom policies in many states across the country, the continued support growing at the federal level for, again, empowering families and empowering the students directly rather than the system, and continuing to advocate for and implement those policies in meaningful ways is what really is going to make the change.
The current secretary has been criticized for just dropping the ball and failing our kids in this country. We're going to be talking to some Republican presidential candidates later on about some of the fixes, some of their ideas of how to move the ball forward. If you had to sort of boil it down to one thing, what would it be?
Boiling it down to one thing, it would be education freedom policies that empower families directly with the resources for that child's education. And that will really ultimately get at all the other issues, the learning loss. You're not going to improve kids' education or where they are today by doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. You have to change that dynamic, and you do that by introducing the freedom to make those decisions to find the right niche, the right setting, the right environment.
Secretary, it seems like in order to go about implementing any type of change, we still need teachers in the classroom. And
Absolutely.
our country is confronting a real shortage on that front. Why is that? And how do we go about changing that? When you talk to young people now, do you still tell them that teaching is a profession worth pursuing?
Well, to be honest, teachers have not been honored as the professionals they are. The system doesn't allow for it. It's a system that moves everyone on lockstep, whether you're a really great, outstanding teacher or whether you're below mediocre. It moves them all along together, and it doesn't give teachers the autonomy that they need to really be able to be creative and at their best in the classroom. So many have been leaving the profession because it's become so frustrating.
Yeah, you have to try to find ways to incentivize them, not just with their salary, but also with that creativity and that sense of ownership, I think, that you're really referring to. We've got this amazing audience here. We want to get back to them. Renarda has a question for you, Secretary.
Yes, my question is, what steps do you propose should be taken to include practical financial education within the K-12 learning, and how do you ensure that students have the know-how to make financial choices as they move forward in life?
That's such a great question, and something that's been sorely lacking in all too many schools in the last couple of dozen years. I think that, again, parents being able to ask those questions and find the schools and the environments that are actually making this a priority is going to ultimately drive more people to seek those options out as well. The marketplace will answer the demand for those kinds of expertise and that kind of opportunity for kids. But I personally think it's an imperative that every young person should be able to understand basic financial concepts and personal budgeting and so forth. We're seeing more schools pay attention to that, but what will drive it more quickly is a greater education freedom marketplace where more people are free to make those decisions and make that choice for their kids.
Secretary, you've had some parents who've wanted to ask questions about the curriculum. They're concerned. Maybe it's the woke concern, as we talked about. Maybe it's just, are we getting financial literacy? But there's some pushback from the establishment on, why are you asking us about curriculum? We're the experts here. How do parents do that in a way that's helpful and they can get the answers that they're looking for?
Well, that's such a good question. And for so many years, parents have been sent the subtle or not so subtle message that, we've got this, we are the professionals, and you don't need to pay attention to what's going on here. But again, the pandemic has opened that all up and revealed that. I think it's important. We're seeing parents across the country going to their school board meetings, asking the questions, and I urge and encourage that. Do so with respect, but do so advocating for your child and for your neighbor's kids. Ask those questions and ask the tough questions.
Love it.
Right. Parents have to band together. Frank has a question.
Hi. The cost of education continues to rise, and the return on investment tends to be quite low. Skilled education, having a skilled trade and knowledge of that typically has a higher return on investment. With an America First policy, how can we start encouraging young adults to get involved and learn about the skilled trades?
Well, Frank, that's such a great question, and one that we really focused on while I was in office, making sure that we are talking about early on the multitude of pathways available to young people and exposing young people from an earlier age, as early middle school, to what some of these alternatives are and what some of these options are. Because you're right, four-year college or university is not for everyone. In fact, far too many students are going on pursuing a four-year university today when they really are interested in something else, but they're being told that the only way that you can be successful is this pathway. Nothing is further from the truth than that. And there are so many other options, and we are again seeing the private sector come in to start really solving these problems as well, because the education establishment has been resistant to these new pathways. We're going to continue to advocate for that wide range of paths that a student can pursue and expose them to them much earlier on.
Frank, you should stick around because we're going to talk about that on this show later. We think it's a really important subject. We've got some great voices on it.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on the show before. We've also made the point that you have to sort of remove some of that stigma away.
Right.
People think there's only one path to get where they need to go. There's not. And sort of, like you say, getting that message out and having people embrace it as part of the issue, too. Robert Kay.
Secretary DeVos, I'm a retired physician, and I was educated in Catholic schools from K throughout college. Where do you see the future for school vouchers for private schools?
Well, first of all, the states that have passed education freedom policies in the last 2 years are far more than we saw in the 30 years before that. And so we are seeing literally thousands and thousands of families being able to make those choices to send their child to a private faith-based school with education savings accounts or vouchers or tax credit scholarships. The mechanisms vary from state to state, but the reality is that more families are able to access those options, and those are going to continue to grow because of the policies most recently passed. And it's really important for families to have those choices.
I mean, at a state level, it is just booming right now in some places. Again, because I think people said, you know what, I want an alternative, give me something. And these states have answered. We covered a lot of ground, Secretary, in just that little amount of time. We're going to bring you back for more later, if that's all right with you. So please stick around with us.